Okay, welcome back. We are going to discuss the Parshas Vaykehel, the end of Parshas Vaykehel, verse 18, chapter 38, verse 18. The screen for the entrance to the courtyard was embroidered out of turquoise, purple, scarlet wool, twined linen. It was 20 cubits in length. And its width was its height of 5 cubits, like the nettings of the courtyard. We're going to focus on the word like the nettings of the courtyard. The Torah uses the word like. The literal translation of the word for like is opposite. So like does not necessarily mean liking something or similar to something. Rather, in this case, it means like would mean opposite. This implies that although the screen was of similar height to the nettings, which was, we just said, was 20 cubits high, and its width was 5 cubits, this implies that although the screen was of similar height to the nettings that constituted the enclosure of the courtyard, it was opposite in purpose. The purpose of the enclosure was to separate between the holy ground of the tabernacle and the outside world. So that was the purpose of the enclosure. Between the holy ground, separation between the holy ground and of the tabernacle and the outside world. Whereas the purpose of the screen was to serve as an opening and an outlet which the divine consciousness that characterized the tabernacle would radiate to the outside world. So one was to create a boundary, one is to create an opening. That's why it says like the nettings, but like would mean opposite in this case. The purpose of the enclosure was a separation, and the purpose of the nettings, the screens, was to serve as an opening. In our own lives, what this has to do with us, in our own lives, our homes and synagogues, our sanctuaries, our private and public realms in which we cultivate divine consciousness through the study of the Torah and the observance of God's commandments. Following the example of the tabernacle, we should view the doors to these realms not as means to close out the outside world, meaning the doors of the synagogue is not to close out the outside world, but as the means to open them to the outside world. So I can look at the door in both ways. Either the door is an opening to the outside world, or it's closing me, protecting me from the outside world. So he says our view of the synagogue should be, there is doors, but the doors are to invite the outside, to open them to the outside world. But as the means to open them to the outside world, so the divine consciousness cultivated in them can spread outward, ultimately transforming the whole world into God's true home. So may it will be that the doors of the synagogue will serve again their purpose of opening divine consciousness to the outside world. And with that, we'll go to the next segment of Geula on Wednesday, the 22nd day of Adar. We'll discuss in Pasuk in Parshas Vaykehel. The Pasuk says, these are the numbers of the Mishkan of the testimony. We're going to focus on the word testimony, which were counted at Moshe's command. Chapter 38, verse 21. Pikudei can also mean the remembrance of. The remembrance of. These are the remembrance of the Mishkan. The Mishkan referring to our constant recollection of the first and the second Beis HaMikdash. We constantly remember the first and the second Beis HaMikdash by the Mishkan itself. The fact that we continue to recall and discuss them so long after the destruction meaning we're discussing the Beis Hamikdash so long after its destruction, 2,000 years. Like the famous anecdote with Napoleon, that he walked into a city in Poland or Russia, and wherever he went, it was dark. But suddenly he saw a place that was lit. He saw a house that was lit. So he came in. As he getting closer, he noticed that it's a temple, it's a synagogue. He walked into a synagogue. He saw Jews sitting on the floor with candles. He said, "What happened? Why everybody is so sad?" He told them, "It's Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av, we are commemorating the destruction of the temple." So he said, "When did the destruction happen?" So they told them 2,000 and somewhat years ago. So he said, if a nation, Jews, can mourn the destruction that took place 2,000 years ago, they will be an everlasting nation. So even the Goy Napoleon came to this understanding that the Jewish nation would be an everlasting nation, will last forever, because they are capable of remembering the Beis Hamikdash. So from here we see the fact that we continue to recall and discuss them so long, discussing the first temple, the second temple, the Mishkan, after the destruction, is itself the testimony referred to in the verse. For as our sages teach, the departed may eventually be forgotten. Hashem made it in such a way that if someone has departed, God forbid, from this world, ultimately he will be forgotten to enable the family to move on. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to move on if they constantly remember the departed. So the fact that we constantly remember the destruction of the temple, it shows that the temple was really there. Because since we have a chazaka, we have a agreement from the sages, meaning they already told us, if someone had passed away, he will be forgotten from the heart. And we see that we're constantly remembering the Beis Hamikdash, the first Beis Hamikdash we speak about, the second Beis Hamikdash, the Mishkan itself we discuss at great length. It shows that they're really that they're really alive, they're really around. It says we refuse to be comforted for these losses, and that is itself the greatest testimony that they are still alive within us, for we constantly anticipate their rebuilding in the form of the third Beis Hamikdash that will be built speedily. So the pasuk continues, which were counted pakad at Moshe's command. Pakad also means to redeem. We will be redeemed at Moshe's command, because Moshe, our first Redeemer, is also Mashiach, our final Redeemer. And this was said by Imrei Noyam. It's taken from Imrei Noyam. Bruchim Tiyeh, the next segment would be with Ein Yaakov.